The title for my proposed critical inquiry is Navigating the Uncanny Valley, Discussions on the Divided Approach of Animation and VFX Visual Development Artists. In order to properly explain the strategies that I'll be using to sort of uncover and discuss this question, I want to first provide a little bit of context and background to this subject matter. Firstly, visual development is defined as an essential part of the animation and live action filmmaking production pipeline. And it is at this stage where materials are converted from written format into their first visual format, whether it be as concept art or paintings. The context of visual development with regards to the investigation into the uncanny valley is about whether design and planning can contain preventative steps that can prevent the uncanny valley occurrence and audience responses. It's also an opportunity within this investigation to look at the context and the outcomes of occurrences of the uncanny valley and what impacts they have on not only the audience but the audience's opinions and relationship with media text. I also intend to look in this investigation into the differing approaches that exist between visual development artists who work within the commercial animation sector and artists who work specifically within live action filmmaking. So let's first talk about the role of the visual development artist. As I previously mentioned, it's primarily about visualization of script. Visual development artists are responsible for taking the written notes and scene breakdowns that are provided by the story team and creating the first visual identity for key scenes and for key sequences within film-based media. They're also responsible for developing character and developing the identity of characters in relationship to specific parts of the narrative. Visual development artists also take a level of responsibility for exploring style and aesthetic choices and ensuring that the meaning of any given narrative is delivered accurately to the audience and is in line with the director's intentions. In a more functional sense, the visual development artist also has a responsibility to provide materials forward along the production pipeline, specifically for the art departments, the look department, and the animation departments within any feature-length or long-form television animation production, or within any live-action VFX film. So the uncanny valley. This is a term that was originally developed with regard to robotics, as first noted by roboticist Masahiro Mori, and it documents the relationship that exists between the design and function of human-like machines and our reaction to their behavior and their design, and the charting of that relationship as it correlates against the human-like nature of a machine. Now, it may have been initially noted within the robotics industries, but it can also be found within animation and also within toy design. The responses that audiences have within to robotics varies. There's lots of factors: environmental factors, behavioral factors, and cultural factors. But there is a pattern that exists between the design of a machine or the design of a non-human object with human-like appearance and a human response to that object. And it's these responses that will be assessed from the perspective of the role and responsibilities of visual development artists in animation. So this is a chart that was produced by roboticist and engineer Carl McDorman. And it actually builds upon Maury's initial research. You can see the scale is human likeness from 0% to 100%, charted against familiarity, or the other way to interpret that would be positivity of response, so from an extremely negative response to an extremely positive response. And the two characteristics that are tracked across this chart are a moving robot and a static robot. And you can see as robots that are moving begin to take on partially human-like characteristics, such as humanoid features, limbs, eyes, things like that, the familiarity or the positivity of response gradually increases amongst a human respondent. And then it reaches a certain point where a robot becomes very lifelike but not perfect, or exists just outside the realm of perfection, that emotional response hits a sharp negative downturn. So examples that McDorman noted in his visualization were the difference between, for example, a humanoid robot and a moving prosthetic hand alone. So something that has human-like qualities but is not perfect. A slightly less dramatic negative response is in still objects. So, for example, a stuffed animal that has certain anthropomorphic qualities will generate a positive response. However, a human corpse or a corpse-like robot, so one that looks visually perfect but does not have the physical mannerisms or movements of a human, would generate a negative response, but not necessarily as negative as a moving object. And it's this gulf that exists between the two positive inclines along the charts. So that sharp dip that exists, that's what Maury described as the uncanny valley. This break in familiarity where our response very dramatically shifts from positive to negative and back to positive again as we move through toward perfect human likeness. So this relationship between artists who design for animation and film and the audience's response to an occurrence of the uncanny valley has led me to raise a series of key questions. So firstly, how do visual development artists strike a balance between realism and exaggeration in order to avoid the uncanny valley? So it's a given that visual development artists have a responsibility to take written material and turn them into visual information. And especially with regard to live action filmmaking, there is a responsibility to develop a level of realism that is very relatable to the audience and that creates a sense of immersion and a suspension of disbelief. So is there some sort of balance that must be occurred between creating objects that are fantastical and unbelievable, so as not to head towards an uncanny valley occurrence, but also realistic enough to allow for suspension of disbelief and to engage the audience? My second key question is what are the creative and technical differences that exist across visual development between VFX and commercial animation? So within these two industry sectors that are very, very closely related, as will be noted in my literature review in a moment, are there specific differences that exist between the way an artist within these two industries would have to behave in order to deliver an outcome that's going to have a positive response? And then my final key question is, what responsibility do visual development artists have in preventing the occurrence of uncanny valley responses? So as they have a responsibility to develop a material and to visualize an idea, do they also take responsibility for ensuring that the audience responds positively to the designs that they have created? Or is that responsibility shared amongst visual development artists and animators and lighting artists and the various other creative and technical roles that exist within both live action / visual effects production and commercial animation production? So in order to address these questions, I have a specific set of strategies and research methodologies set out. The first methodology will be a literature review in which I'll conduct a summary analysis of contemporary industry perspectives on the uncanny valley, specifically within media products. As I mentioned, it is commonly occurring within robotics, but that's not an area that's relevant to my research. So it will be specifically within animation and live action VFX products. In addition to that, I'll be conducting case study analysis and critical discussion on the physical, technical, creative processes and strategies that are employed by a selection of contemporary visual development practitioners. And I'll be looking at what impact their work has had on an audience, and whether there have been any occurrences of uncanny valley responses in the work that they've created. The third research methodology that will form part of this critical inquiry will be a critical discourse analysis of specific media texts, as opposed to the artists that created them, and an evaluative discussion on audience responses and occurrences of the uncanny valley. So looking at not just the role of the visual development artist per se, but the collective outcomes and the many roles that were responsible for the output of that product, and how the audience have responded to an occurrence of the uncanny valley. To support these research methodologies, as mentioned, I will be conducting a literature review. These are the first 4 texts that I have selected for that literature review, though based on discussions I'll have with my peers, it's likely that I may adapt these or add new text to the list. So the first one is Worlds, the Art of Raphael Lacoste. Raphael Lacoste is a concept artist, visual development artist, who specializes in extremely high levels of realism, both in character design but also in world design. And within his book, he details not only the output that he provides for both live action and animated products, but also his workflow and the process by which he develops those ultra real concepts. The second 2 books in the literature review are The Art of Moana by Disney Publishing and The Art of Rogue One, a Star Wars story, edited by Josh Cushins. The reason I've selected both of these texts to review is because they deal with the entire workflow of a feature-length media production, and actually break down the visual development process quite clearly and go to great lengths to explain the workflow and the responsibilities that visual development artists have. The reason that I have sat them side by side within the literature review is specifically because one of them has dealt with the production of a very stylized commercial animation, and the other is a very, very realistic depiction of human characters within a fantastical sci-fi setting as a live-action production. It's also worth noting at this point that that Rogue One actually contains 2 occurrences of uncanny valley responses, so I'm hoping to sort of glean some more information on how that was allowed to occur through my analysis of this text. And then the fourth element of my literature review is The Uncanny Valley in Games and Animation by Angela Tinwell, which is a more academic and analytical assessment of how the uncanny valley occurrences come about within the construction process and the design process, specifically within 3D animation and commercial games development. In addition to my literature review, I'll also be conducting a series of case studies on the work of specific artists. The artists that I have selected at this stage are Ryan Lang, who is a visual development artist for Walt Disney Animation Studios, Craig Mullins, who is a freelance concept artist, Carla Ortiz, a concept artist currently working at Marvel Studios, and Mark Molnar, who's a concept artist at Pixeloid Studios. All 4 of these artists have worked across both animation and live action. The selection of their work is for a number of reasons. Firstly, Ryan Lang is well known for producing very, very stylized design work, both characters and environments and entire scenes. His most notable work would be Big Hero 6, the Walt Disney Animation feature film. Craig Mullins is a concept artist who's worked for live action film and for video games production, and is well known for his hyper-real depictions of humanoid characters and for his costume work. Carla Ortiz was selected because she has worked to produce very realistic humanoid characters and human characters across both live-action film and print-based media as well. Before working for Marvel Studios, she was contracted for a period of time to Wizards of the Coast, producing concept art for their card game Magic: The Gathering. So an analysis of her work will help to better understand the transition that occurs when taking information in a 2D format, so as a painting or as a sketch, and translating it into a 3-dimensional environment, which will hopefully provide some opportunity to better understand the conditions under which an uncanny valley occurs. happens. And then finally, Mark Molnar, who was one of the lead concept artists on Rogue One, a Star Wars story, which, as I've previously mentioned, has two separate occurrences of uncanny valley responses. So an analysis of his practice may shed some light and give some explanation as to not only how these occurrences happened, but also why they were allowed to occur, and whether any responsibility for those occurrences can be traced back to his work as a visual development artist. So with all that research undertaken, there are some projected outcomes based on the sort of investigations that have currently happened. So the first projected outcome from this critical inquiry will hopefully be a tangible breakdown of effective strategies that can be employed by visual development artists specifically to help prevent the occurrence of uncanny valley responses. The second projected outcome is a widening in our understanding of the variation of practice and responsibility that exists across all of the animation and VFX industries. So, though the scope for this inquiry is within visual development, I think this research will also provide some kind of insight into how other parts of the pipeline share some level of responsibility for ensuring that uncanny valley occurrences do not happen. And then finally, the last projected outcome will be a developed knowledge, actually, of visual development workflows and the impact that pre-production has, not just on the production of media texts, but also on the reception of those texts and how the audience can relate to material. So it's very much going to hopefully be quite illuminating to see how something that was produced, 2, 3, sometimes up to 10 years before the broadcast of a media product can have such a sort of profound impact on the way that the audience responds to that product and in turn the success of that product.